I'm excited to get started with today's webinar, Overcoming Test Anxiety. Sometimes you can do all of the legwork prior to a test. You can review your notes, study your materials, even practice with a friend. But on the day of, the stress and anxiety of actually having to take that test can take over. It happens to the best of us, and that's why today our learning services team is going to walk you through understanding some of the root causes of test anxiety, strategies to help deal with that anxiety, and some ways to help you relax in the moment. I'm very excited to be joined by today's presenters, Maeva Kajo, Alexis Miller, Henry Price, and Stephanie Close, as they walk you through how to overcome test anxiety. So without further ado, I'll pass it on over to them.
Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar on overcoming test anxiety. My name is Maeva and we're eager to talk to you about how to identify signs of test anxiety, what causes it, some great ways to prepare for a test in the weeks leading up, strategies and steps you can take on the actual test day, and opportunities to identify what you can improve on for your next test day. You can take what we discussed today and apply it to tests you take in any class, a standardized test, or even an online quiz you might be taking from your kitchen. We'll kick things off by defining test anxiety. Have you ever felt your heart race, palms sweat, or mind go blank right before an exam? If so, you may have experienced test anxiety. It is more than feeling a little nervous before a test. It is actually a type of performance anxiety. Here's a quote that sums it up pretty well. When there is pressure because of high expectations or the stakes are high, people can become so anxious that they are hindered from doing their best. So feeling nervous before a test can be normal. However, when that nervousness turns into overwhelming anxiety, it can harm your health and academic performance, and that's what we want to discuss today. So how do you recognize if you may have test anxiety? Here are some common signs. The first sign is freezing or going blank during tests. You freeze or you're unable to recall information when it's test time, even when you prepared and studied hard. The next one is worrying about forgetting material while studying and feeling unprepared. You constantly worry that you're not prepared or will forget everything despite knowing the material well and studying a lot. In this case, you would also spend countless hours studying but still feel like you're unprepared. The next sign is feeling of doom, fear of failure, or difficulty concentrating. In this case, you are stressed and upset about a coming test and preoccupied with thoughts of failure. And you have a hard time staying focused while studying because just the thought of the test overwhelms you. Next one is procrastinating until the last minute. That's when you avoid studying for the test and procrastinate until the night before or the day of the test. Next one is performing well in class or on homework but failing during the test. So you know the material when you're in class or when you're doing homework, but during this test you're struggling. And the last sign is lack of confidence. Negative thoughts takes over and you give up on the test without really trying because you think you're going to fail anyway. Another way to identify test anxiety is through its symptoms. So what can test anxiety feel like in your body? Test anxiety symptoms can range from mild to severe and vary from person to person. You may experience mild symptoms and still do well on exams, while others can experience such overwhelming anxiety that it leads to panic attacks before or during tests. The Anxiety and Depression Association of America categorizes symptoms into physical, cognitive, and behavioral and emotional types. So firstly, let's discuss physical symptoms. These include increased heart rate, sweating, dry mouth, nail picking, clenched jaw, teeth grinding, shaking, fainting, panic attacks, and nausea. So as you can see, it can really show up in different ways. Then we have cognitive and behavioral symptoms. These include negative self-talk, which we all probably do from time to time, avoidance, challenges with focus, as well as racing thoughts you might have during a test. Then there are the emotional symptoms. These include low self-esteem, depressive symptoms, frustration, irritability, feeling overwhelmed, and a sense of hopelessness. To better manage and understand your test anxiety, it is important to track your signs and symptoms. One way you can do it is by using a journal to note how you feel before, during, and after the test. Reflecting on these journal entries can help you identify patterns and triggers for your anxiety. Another way is to talk to people who are close to you, friends, family, or classmates about the observations because they might notice signs of anxiety that you have not noticed. Now that we've covered the signs and symptoms of test anxiety, I'll hand it over to Alexis to dive into what causes it.
Thanks, Maeva. It's normal and common to experience test anxiety. You want to get a good test score because it could affect your overall grade in class. Or maybe you're taking a standardized test and it means getting into graduate school or beginning your chosen profession, such as nursing, counseling, or practicing law. Epictetus once said, "People are disturbed not by a thing, but by their perception of a thing." So now that you know how to determine the signs of test anxiety, let's take a closer look at some of the most common causes. So one common cause is the fear of failure. If this resonates with you, then you might believe that your score reflects your intelligence or your value as a person. Therefore, if you do well, you're worthy. And if you get a low grade, you're a failure. There are many ways to define success, though, and one test score alone probably won't make or break who you are or what your future will look like. Also, keep in mind that fear is just an emotion, it's not a fact. We all experience successes and failures at some point in our lives. Try instead to frame a test as an opportunity to show what you know and use your score as feedback or a learning opportunity moving forward. Similarly, you may feel pressure to perform when taking a test. You may think, I need to get an A, otherwise I'll fail this class. Or if I don't pass the NCLEX, I'll never become a nurse. Although it's important to set goals when testing, one exam is unlikely to make or break your grade in a class or your career. Any given test is likely weighted with other scores, projects, and assignments, and standardized tests can usually be retaken if necessary. So set goals, prepare, and do your best come exam day. But remember that a test is one aspect of the big picture. And although it's great to set standards and expectations for yourself, being overly critical and perfectionistic could become counterproductive. Research shows that students who have high perfectionism tend to do worse on exams than those who don't. Breaking this tendency can be easier said than done, but it's important to validate yourself for the work that you have done to prepare and accept that it's okay to make mistakes. It's natural and a side effect of being human. On the other hand, maybe you're feeling anxious because you haven't prepared enough. Your study material was calling your name, but PlayStation was calling louder. Then finally at 11 p.m. on the night before the test, you're hitting the books, and come exam time, regret is setting in. I should have studied more, you think. The good news is this hasn't happened yet, so you can act now. Create a study plan that you'll stick to. Make a timeline leading up to the test of what you'll study and when, and build in small rewards that'll keep you motivated. That way, come test day, you'll thank yourself for giving you your best shot at doing well. And finally, you may be feeling test anxiety because of previous negative experiences you've had with testing. Maybe you had a strict teacher or a parent who placed a lot of importance on getting good grades. Or maybe you struggled in a math class and decided that math just wasn't for you. If this is the case, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and imagine yourself spraying Windex on those memories. Wipe them clean from your mind. You're looking at a blank slate and deciding to start fresh. What you've experienced in the past doesn't have to determine what you experience going forward. And now I'll pass it over to Henry.
Thanks, Alexis. So let's talk about what you can do about all of this. Let's talk about what you can do to put yourself in the best possible situation. And we'll start by talking about what you can do before test day. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, sure, obviously, I have to study before a test, not during it. But it goes beyond studying. We're going to talk about concrete strategies to get yourself mentally and physically ready to overcome those symptoms and causes of test anxiety that we just learned about. Well, okay, I am actually going to talk about studying for a minute. I know you've been told by everyone your whole life that you should study and don't procrastinate. This is not breaking news. So, sure, of course, don't procrastinate. But if you want to call that advice, it isn't super useful if you still don't even know where to begin, right? So, over the next couple minutes, we want to offer some specific advice for how to study in ways that increase not just your knowledge, but your confidence. See, it's a vicious cycle. Your anxiety about an upcoming test makes you unsure where to start, which makes you avoid thinking about it. Avoidance is just another word for procrastination, and procrastination, you guessed it, leads to more anxiety. Avoidance can be worse than the actual activity because you're giving that anxiety all the power. And now, on top of everything else, you have that nagging voice telling you that maybe it's your own fault. Try to put that aside. Remember that the entry point into that vicious cycle was that you weren't sure where to start and what to do first. See, here's a secret. There's no right or wrong way to do this, no right or wrong thing to do first. You do have to do something. One good way to do that is to jump in and take a practice test, if one's available to you, or a short content quiz like some of the ones we have here at Tutor.com. In addition to giving you some data about what your strengths and weaknesses are, it might kick off your study journey so you have some momentum to carry you forward. Just as important as the actual content are test taking strategies. We're going to dig into those in just a minute. These are things that don't depend on your understanding of the content of any particular test, so they can be a good thing to review first if the content itself is a little intimidating. All right, so you found your starting point, you're motivated to do more. Next, you'll need to make sure that you're using your time efficiently. Here are some ways to do that. So if it's a high stakes test or just a big one, studying for days and maybe even weeks before the test could be necessary. But efficiency means doing only the things that pay off. The worst feeling is to sit down for a test, open it up, and realize you studied the wrong stuff because you didn't know what was going to be on the test. To avoid that, ask questions of your instructor. Ask what the most important concepts are. What types of questions are going to be on the test? Ask for a study guide. Gather as much information as you can. Some people hesitate to do that. They don't want to ask for help. Maybe they feel like admitting they need help will make them look bad. But look at it from the instructor's perspective. You're showing interest in their topic. You're validating their job, which is to teach you. They should welcome the chance to help. If you're not comfortable having that kind of in-person conversation with, for instance, a college professor, consider sending an email or talk to a TA. You'll want to create a study plan and establish a routine. Alexis was just talking about this a second ago. An efficient student will schedule time and will also schedule what to do during that time. So tell yourself, I'm going to go eat dinner, grab a coffee, turn my phone off, leave it in the other room, and go sit down on my balcony for study time. I'm going to do this every night this week from 7 to 9 p.m. Okay, that's an oddly specific example, but whatever your plan is, the important thing is to follow it. What parts of the material should you study and in what order, and so you can maximize your test score? You can consider several factors here. First, again, take your cues from your instructor. Did they spend a lot of time explaining something or assign a lot of additional readings on a specific topic? That's a pretty good sign they think it's important. And be honest with yourself about your strengths and your weaknesses. How comfortable are you with each of the major concepts and the details that are going to be on that test? It might seem logical to devote a ton of time to the thing you had the hardest time understanding, and hey, if you have unlimited time, it's probably worth it. But at the same time, don't overlook your strengths. Topics you're already pretty good at present an opportunity to go from good to great in a lot less time. And those points count just as much as any on the test. So if your time is limited, this may be a better way to improve your test score than learning something more or less from scratch. Research strategies for the specific test type that you're going to take. For example, if it's a standardized test like the SAT, there are all kinds of strategies you can read about online. I should mention Tutor.com is also affiliated with the Princeton Review, which is all about test prep. So you can take a look at those resources if you're about to take a standardized test. And that includes everything from the SAT, AP tests, all the way up through graduate tests like the GRE and the MCAT. Different tests, though, require different approaches. Multiple choice tests are very different from essay or free response tests. A teacher-given exam is very different from a standardized test. So make sure you know what you're dealing with and give yourself practice tests in that test format. Use those tests to not only work on your test-taking skills, but also to practice controlling that anxiety level. If possible, time those practice sections, even if you have to set your own timer. You're trying to simulate what you will experience on test day so that you can employ your strategies. In other words, to the degree possible, know what to expect. If your instructor made the test, ask them what the test is like. Yeah, instructors hate having their lecture interrupted by students who ask, is this going to be on the test? But they don't mind questions like, what question types are going to be on this test? Or what format is this test in? Or do you have any tips for doing my best? If it's a standardized test, you can probably look up how much of the exam is focused on what concepts. And if you know going in that only 2 questions are about, let's say, business law, for example, then you won't waste all your time studying business law when there are actually 40 questions on tax law. And as we said a few minutes ago, there's much more to test readiness than studying. You need to consider your physical well-being too. People rarely do their best when they feel their worst. So even if it's the kind of test you could cram for, like a vocabulary quiz, staying up all night the night before is never a great move. Pulling an all-nighter can wreck your nerves. Having adequate rest, I'm talking 8, 9, 10 hours a night, is more beneficial than rereading the text 8, 9, 10 times in a row. When you're tired, your problem-solving abilities are lower because your brain works more slowly. This is clearly not helpful in a hard test. Sleep is directly related to academic performance. So establish a sleep routine. For several days leading up to your test, not just the day of, get good rest, set a bedtime, and wake up at the same time. And be consistent with that so you're not jarring your body and trying to do something totally new the day before or the day of the test. Nutrition matters too. Eat a nutritious breakfast before the test. Pack a snack for ongoing energy. What does that mean exactly? Now, some things apply to everyone. The human body and brain need food to function. No one should take a test on an empty stomach. So you do need to eat. When considering what to eat, look for foods that offer a steady stream of nutrients. If your test lasts more than about 30 minutes, then that sugar rush that helps you at first will lead to a sugar crash that hurts you later. So I don't recommend relying on candy and soda. Highly caffeinated or energy drinks, which, by the way, usually also contain a lot of sugar, could raise your heart rate, which heightens your senses, but it also heightens your anxiety. And pure carbohydrates like potato chips and popcorn can trick your body into wanting to eat more of them. So you may feel unsatisfied even if you eat a lot of it. Okay, that was a lot of don'ts. So what should you do? Well, protein is usually a good decision. Something sensible like eggs, turkey sausage, or toast, or the vegan or gluten-free alternatives to those should sustain you for a good long while. And no matter what, you should drink plenty of water. Beyond that, the details really depend on your usual habits. After all, test day is not the day to experiment with things that you are not used to. You often hear people say things like, eggs are brain food, which, I mean, okay, sure. And I just said eggs are a decent option. So if you can even find affordable eggs right now and eggs are your usual breakfast, then yes, you should eat them. But don't risk an upset stomach by going outside your comfort zone and eating a 4-egg omelet for the first time in your life. In short, once again, feel as much like yourself as you can. So like if this monstrosity is what you get for yourself every morning of your life, then feel free to have one on test day. Live your best life. It may be a fairly short one, but if not, please don't. And on a more serious note, please don't do what some of my students have asked me about over the years. This is a true story. Should you take your friend's Adderall because it supposedly increases concentration? Look, if you haven't been prescribed something like Adderall, you do not know what it will do for you. A bad test grade is bad. A medical emergency is worse. All right. Note what we just said about feeling like yourself. This is so important. And beyond just food and rest, another way to accomplish that is to give yourself plenty of time to arrive at your test site and get settled. Because after doing all this planning and work to decrease your anxiety, you certainly don't want to have that all go down the drain because you're panicking about whether you're going to be there on time. So do anything you can to prevent this. Here are some ways to do that. Pack everything you need for the exam the night before, particularly if you have a morning test. Make sure you have fresh batteries in your calculator if it's a math test. If you're taking the test at a testing center, review what the rules are. Are you allowed to bring your phone in or a smartwatch? If you're not allowed to do that, can you have an analog watch so you can keep time legally? Do you need to provide a picture ID or an entrance ticket? A lot of standardized tests require that now. Make sure you have all of this ready so you aren't looking for it on test day, or worse, show up without it. If you're driving, do you know the best route to the testing center? If you're taking public transportation or a ride share, do you know the schedule? Is there any weather or construction expected that could change your route or slow you down? On the morning of, check that Maps app on your phone one more time so you know if you need to leave even earlier than you planned. Set an alarm, maybe 2. Leave time for that sensible breakfast we just talked about. Whatever it takes to get out the door on time. Now, not every test involves leaving your house. Maybe you're taking an online test. The same principles apply, even if they play out a little differently. If you're testing remotely, eliminate distractions. If that isn't realistic in your home, consider going to an internet cafe or a library. Get all set up with your computer, some water, a calculator if you need one. Make sure you have your camera and internet connection working on your computer. Put your phone and computer in do not disturb mode and give yourself a chance to settle in and take a few deep breaths. All right, that sounded like a lot. You know what? It kind of is. But none of these things are actual problems unless you aren't prepared for them. If you are, they have no power over you. All right, I'll leave you with one final thought. This theme of feeling like yourself extends to your wardrobe too. On the day of the test, wear comfortable clothes and shoes. The last thing you need is for a broken or overactive air conditioner to ruin your day. You can't control any of that, but you can plan for it. Bring layers. Wear what feels good and makes you feel comfortable and confident, within reason, of course, and within the rules for the testing site. That was a lot about what to do ahead of time. So now I'm going to kick it over to Stephanie, and she's going to talk about what to do when the timer does start ticking on the test itself.
Thanks, Henry. Hi, everyone. So you've prepared, you've gotten dressed, you've done all the things Henry just talked about. You've made it to the testing site or your classroom, and it's time to begin. What can you do during the test to calm those nerves if and when they start up? First, you want to try to limit and avoid distractions as much as you can. If possible, sit near the front of the room. You may not be the type to sit in the front of class normally, but on test days, it can be beneficial. It helps you avoid the distraction of everyone around you. If you are taking an online exam, make sure you're in a quiet place. Don't take an exam in the same room as your roommate watching TV or where your dad might be cooking dinner. Set yourself up in a distraction-free zone. If you wear a watch, try not to wear one that vibrates, or at least make sure that feature is turned off. Even if you don't look at your watch during the test, the vibrations of the notifications can distract you and pull you out of focus. Along those same lines, be sure your phone is in your bag or put away out of sight. And of course, that it is set to do not disturb, so it doesn't ring or vibrate during the test. If you're allowed to listen to music and it helps you, it's probably best to choose classical music. It's the least distracting for your brain because it's calming and doesn't have lyrics. If you're in a crowded room, it may be tempting to think about what others around you are doing. Why did they finish so quickly? Or why do they seem to know all the answers and not look as confused as I am? Don't worry about the person next to you or in front of you who may be going through the test twice as fast or super slow. You never know what test-taking strategies they are using or how hard they studied. And if you're someone who does get easily distracted, see if you're allowed to wear earplugs or noise-canceling headphones without the music. Creating that quiet space for you to focus and not hear little noises around you can help you lock in and focus on what you need to do. When you're taking the test, it's important to take your time. Read the test carefully. Know what is expected of you, and be sure not to make careless errors from rushing. Read the directions thoroughly before you start. Read the questions being asked carefully, and read all the answer choices before deciding on a correct answer. There's nothing worse than putting time into a question and realizing you didn't follow the directions and answered it incorrectly. And while the test isn't designed to fool you, you can expect a few curveballs on the exam. Your prediction of what questions would appear on the test is not going to always match with what the writer of the test had in mind. And that is okay. You can still do very well. When those curveballs do appear, don't get upset and lose your concentration. Instead, make an intelligent guess or mark the question to review later and move on. And keep a light eye on the clock and manage your time appropriately. You want to be aware of where you are on the test, how far you have to go, and how much time you're spending on certain questions. However, you don't want to be so focused on the time that it becomes a stress point for you. So just be aware and check in on yourself from time to time. Another way to help alleviate test anxiety during the test is to know a few strategies for how you are going to get through the test. One strategy is skipping the questions when you don't know them, if you are able to skip. I know some tests do not allow that. Maybe you want to get all the questions you know well finished first, and then go back and put your energy into the ones you really need to think about. If you like this method, just be sure at the end of the test to go back through and make sure all the questions are answered. When you skip around, you can accidentally leave questions unanswered, so leave time to check for that. Completing the essay or written portion of the test first is another great strategy. Many students get very worried or hung up over the written part of a test. Other students love that part because they feel they can show what they know in their own words. Decide ahead of time how you feel about any written parts and if you would prefer to do them first or last. Another strategy is to take the entire test in order as it is and then go back and review it. This is probably the most common test taking strategy. Just be aware that sometimes nervous test takers can be prone to, when going back over their test, changing correct answers to incorrect answers. They second guess themselves or talk themselves out of their original answer. So if you find that when you go back, you start second guessing yourself and you're changing a lot of your answers, stop yourself and know that your first instincts are usually the right ones, unless it's very obvious that you made a mistake. And last, think about how you can use scratch paper to help you with your test. Many times you're provided or allowed to have scratch paper, so use it to your advantage. You can use it to make a little plan for yourself. What do you want to do first, next, and last? Or you can jot down questions that you've skipped and use it as a reminder to ensure you will come back and revisit them later. You can even use it for notes to help you keep track of thoughts, ideas, and reminders that you have during the test. Depending on the format of the test, it's great to have some of these strategies in your back pocket. Another part of taking a test that can happen is the big freeze. If it hasn't happened to you, consider yourself lucky. But many of us experience this during tests. We just freeze up and our brain gets stuck. This freeze can happen when we ask our memory to recall information we know we have learned, but we just can't recall it. Sometimes information we study gets filed incorrectly in our brain. Then our brain goes looking for it in the wrong place, and we start to panic when it's not there. To help fix this and unfreeze yourself during a test, you can simply pause and breathe. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in just a minute. But you can take a moment or two to just focus on that deep breathing and get yourself calm. Then think about how you learned this material in class and how you studied it when you were preparing for the test. Are you relying on your memorization to answer this question? If so, you might need to dig a little deeper and think about what you know and what you have learned. What details do you remember from class or from studying that might create a domino effect of recalling information? Sometimes just getting a few details to the top of your mind about a topic can cause your memory to find what it's looking for. If you're stuck on a particular question, like we just talked about, just skip it or guess if you can't skip and move on to something easier that you feel confident about. You can usually come back to a challenging question later, and chances are your memory will be jogged in some capacity from the rest of the exam. Sometimes jumping to another style of a question could be enough to snap you out of a frozen state. And take a few minutes to glance over the rest of the test. If you get to that point where you're frozen, stop and just look ahead at the rest of the test. Often you will see other questions on the test that come later, and they can spark an idea or a thought. And sometimes the answer to one question can give you clues for other questions. And no matter how much you prepared or what strategies you decide to use, you still might feel your heart race, your palms sweat, or your stomach tighten up when you sit down to take that test. Nervousness isn't always bad, though. Nerves can be used to actually help you focus. So if that happens, just take a minute and try this little exercise to help you get control of those nerves and use them for good. You can do this with anything you're nervous about, not just testing. Maybe it's a bumpy airplane ride or walking into a job interview. It may feel weird at first, but remember that everyone else is focused on their test, not you. No one will even really notice you are doing it. Start by closing your eyes. Then breathe in slowly to the count of 5 and exhale to the count of 5. You can even visualize a blue circle in your mind that closes in when you breathe in and gets wider when you breathe out. Deep breathing can slow down a beating heart or a racing mind. Just continue this slow breathing until you feel your body begin to relax, and you can do this a few times. Then open your eyes and give yourself a positive and very specific self-talk. You're going to do well on this test. You've studied hard, you know the material, you've got this. This whole exercise should take only about a minute, and it's well worth the time if you are feeling anxious during the test. So now I'm going to pass it back over to Alexis, and she's going to share some tips for when you finally get that test finished.
Thanks, Stephanie. So you finished the test and you're leaving the exam room. Now what? You may feel confident that you did well, or you may overanalyze the whole thing wondering, did I get that question right? Should I have gone with my first answer? Since the test is over and there's no going back, the best thing that you can do is release yourself from the need to be perfect. You may go into exams feeling that you studied everything you needed to know. And then when the exam is over, you feel defeated and that you wasted all that time studying because you didn't know anything on the test. Be kind to yourself and know that you prepared and did the best that you could, no matter the outcome. It can be emotionally difficult to let go of perfectionism, but it's important to try. Here are a few tips for overcoming perfectionism. Remember that it's virtually impossible to learn every detail, so focus on the most important concepts and learn those well enough to be successful. Your understanding of the major concepts will help you guess well on some of the details that you're unable to recall during the test. Know when you've done your best and accept what comes from that. Sometimes your best will be a C. Sometimes your best will be an A. Just know yourself and when you've tried your hardest. You can't go back and you can only move forward, so don't beat yourself up over it. Just move on for next time. Be sure to set realistic goals. Try a mission statement like, I want to achieve an 80% or better on all tests and an 85% or better on all written work in a particular class. You may not even get that specific, but know what you're asking of yourself. And beware of undue pressure. Your realistic goal should not be to score 100% on all exams. And if you think a class is going to be one way and you discover a couple weeks in that it's either easier or harder than you expected, adjust your goals. Goals are meant to be fluid and fine-tuned as needed. If the class is easier than you expected, push yourself and raise your expectations. On the flip side, though, if the class is way harder than you thought, adjust those goals and be mindful of what you expect of yourself. Adaptability is key to success. And finally, like Elsa sang in Frozen, let it go. A test isn't a definitive measure of how intelligent you are, and one test alone won't make or break your future. Your performance on an exam mostly depends on how effectively you studied and which test-taking strategies you used. So now, give yourself permission to decompress. Go out for your favorite meal, or get yourself a cup of coffee or bubble tea. Make plans to meet up or talk on the phone with a friend. This will help you get your mind off the test and regain perspective from someone you trust. Go outside. Take a walk and breathe in the fresh air, or go for a drive and listen to your favorite music or audiobook to recenter yourself and clear your head. Listen to music. You may want to create an anxiety-friendly playlist of songs that always calm you down and lift your spirits. And finally, practice breathing exercises, or listen to a guided meditation video on YouTube. This will help ease your nerves and keep you present. Then, once you get your test back, you can evaluate your performance. By this point, you might be over it and think, there's nothing I could do about it now, and quickly push it out of your mind. If you want to improve your test taking anxiety and you're great on the next exam, though, we don't recommend this approach. Instead, evaluate what you did well and where you need to focus more. Look at what you got right and wrong on the exam and where you lost points so you can review those topics again. Then reassess your notes and figure out if you need to adjust your current note-taking strategy. Are your notes helpful, thorough, and informative? Are they organized and easy to review? If you're a visual learner like me, you may want to use colorful highlighters to break up the visual noise on the page and create a sense of order. Or if you learn by listening, record yourself reading your notes and listen to them while driving, doing chores, or running errands. And finally, create a plan for next time. In order to get different results, you'll need to take a different approach. Reflect on the tips we've shared today, consider which ones you'd like to employ going forward, and test them out. If you find something that works well for you, stick with it and keep fine-tuning your habits until you've created a system that works well for you. We'd like to thank you all for coming today, and now I'll hand it back over to Maxine.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for all that great information and for all the attendees for kind of learning a little bit more about test anxiety. So for our next webinar, we're going to be focusing on how to write a research paper. It's going to be filled with a bunch of actual like practical information on like how to structure a research paper, how to use the appropriate vocabulary, and things like how to kind of find and source credible sources. That is going to be on April 8th at 4 p.m. Eastern. So do sign up. If you signed up for this webinar, you'll be getting some information in that follow-up webinar. Additionally, before we get to questions, there are a couple of other sites and pages I wanted to highlight. The first is our webinars page or our webinar hub. This is where we host all of our previous recordings and links to upcoming webinars. So if you enjoyed some of the information that you found here, or want to see just some of the other topics we've done in the past, please do go to tutor.com/webinars. Additionally, you can follow us on our socials on Facebook and Instagram at tutor.com. That way, anytime we're posting about new webinars or events that we might be hosting, you can get that information and join us. And then lastly here is our YouTube page. If you go to tutor.com/YouTube webinars, that will bring you directly to our playlist where we link to every single webinar that we've done in the past, whether it's study skills related, career focused, test prep resources, all of that kind of stuff can be found within that playlist. So again, do go ahead and kind of play around there. Now, when it came to questions, we did get a couple of questions. One of them was if this was going to be recorded. And like I mentioned at the very top, this webinar is recorded and it's going to be sent out in a follow-up email within the next day or so. Included in that follow-up email, like I mentioned, will be information about our upcoming webinars, as well as a PDF version of this PowerPoint. So you'll get access again to all of this information and the references that we've put together. We also got some questions about kind of studying effectively and some tips and tricks on how to structure a study session. For that, I would actually really recommend going to our webinar hub that I mentioned earlier. You'll find some previous recordings that we've done that focus on study skills and other topics similar to that. So there's going to be a lot of information there. And then one question that did come in, and Henry, maybe this one is something that you can answer. What are some examples of questions you should ask your teacher regarding the upcoming test?
Yeah, I would say keep them about the test, right? Rather than the content, because teachers, professors are not going to want to give you the answers, right? But you can ask about the format of the test. You can ask them about what types of things you might see on the test. And as I said a little while ago, pay attention to what they're not saying, but what they're doing, right? So when you're going through your semester with them, do they spend what seems like a really long time on a concept? Do they assign additional research projects around a concept? Chances are they're going to want to test you to see if you understood that concept, right? So those kinds of questions and those kinds of ways of evaluating what your instructor is doing can be helpful. Careful about asking the really generic sort of, is this going to be on the test sort of question? Because that does annoy them. So you want to keep your questions about, whether or not you fully understand what the testing experience is going to be like. Is it multiple choice? Is it essay? That kind of thing. They should feel comfortable telling you because they're not giving anything away that they mind giving away.
Awesome. And kind of in a similar vein, kind of just talking about the teacher, what do you have any suggestions on what to do if you're struggling on focusing within a lecture, no matter how hard you try? Because for one person in the attendance, sometimes this causes them to feel not prepared for the tests that are based on those lectures. So do you have any kind of tips on that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, lecture is like the worst way to learn for a lot of people. Couple of things during the lecture, if you can take notes, that will keep you engaged sort of by default, right? You can get yourself focused on what they're saying by making sure you're writing it down or typing it, right? Also, if you record the lesson, like if you might want to get your professor's permission for this, but if you can audio record the lesson on your phone or however, then if you miss something, you can literally just rewind and listen to it again. So that might give you a chance to figure out what you missed. Like if you're listening to it again, you're like, I don't remember him saying this. That's because that was one of the moments you weren't able to keep your focus. So there it is. You can always go back and listen to it later. But again, you should double check that the person's comfortable being recorded before you do that.
All right. And then I think the last question that we have coming in, maybe some more will come during this answer, is what would be the best way to study for exams that are on the same week or kind of studying for an exam the same week that it's happening? I know some of this is content that we covered in some of our previous webinars focusing on study skills. But if anybody here has any kind of quick tips on that. Otherwise, again, definitely go to our webinar hub.
I would just again say pick your battles. So if you don't have very much time, then like we said during the session, you're probably not going to be able to like wrap your mind around some huge concept that up until now has been escaping you, right? And I'm not saying you should give up on that, but that's probably not where the quickest test score improvement is for you. It's probably in something that's a quick win. So shore up a couple of details on a concept you're fairly comfortable with. Go back and look through your notes and see if there's anything that, just seeing it one more time is just going to be enough for you to commit that to memory. So when your time is limited, you want to find the points where they're easy to get. And as much as it's tempting to be like, well, I got to see if I can get this huge thing that I didn't understand the first time. If you're honest with yourself, that might not be possible. And then the test day comes and you're not really any closer. So get the points wherever you can.
And just to add to that, if I can too, I know a lot of my students, even if the school doesn't provide you an agenda or a planner, I highly recommend running and getting one or printing one offline, online and having it like a paper copy and really kind of scheduling your studying manageable chunks of a little bit of time for each subject and really planning that out. It can be overwhelming when you've got 3, 4 tests in 1 week and it's all coming at you. So if you can plan out that you're going to do an hour of this subject on this day and an hour of this subject on the next day and kind of see that as a big picture, it really can help you plan that out when you have a lot of them all at once.
Yeah, and going back to our theme of anxiety, right? When you don't have very much time, your anxiety is already heightened, right? So that's when it starts to become easy to go against some of the advice that we were just saying, like get enough sleep and, take care of yourself. But honestly, those things will matter every bit as much as the extra time you spend studying. So balance is what matters.
All right. And then I think we have time for one more question. Um, and it basically is, do you have any tips on studying or preparing for an exam when you just don't have the motivation to do so?
Tough. I don't want to answer all the questions. Does anybody want to jump in on that? Stephanie, and your answer was great a second ago.
Yeah, I mean that's I think something that a lot of students struggle with, right? Is there are classes you have to take and tests that you have to take that you maybe don't really have interest in. So, if there are small ways you can connect that to something that does interest you, that's obviously a great way to do it. But I know that that's not always the case. I think the best way is to break things down into small chunks because then it's not so overwhelming for you and it's not all of this material that you have no interest really in or no motivation to study. But if you're like, okay, I'm going to break this down to a small chunk, I'm going to work on this for a small amount of time, and then I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to come back and do a little bit more. Maybe that can help because it's not so daunting when you see it all in front of you. It is hard to be motivated to take a test and study on something you don't have a lot of interest in, but it's also, as I have told my students in the past, you just have to kind of buckle down and get through it. And, by tomorrow or the next day, it will be behind you. And so to keep that in your mind too does help.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for those questions, everybody who joined us today. And for the team up here presenting, thanks for those answers. Again, I did just want to remind folks you will be getting a recording. So if you are working with students on your end, please feel free to share this recording and any other recordings of our webinars with them if you think that that will be helpful. Again, thanks so much for joining today. We look forward to hopefully seeing you in our upcoming webinars, but I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.